had always been a light sleeper. The slightest sound or flicker of light could jolt him awake. His bedroom, meticulously arranged for comfort, was his sanctuary. But lately, it had become a place of dread. Every night, as the world outside his window grew silent, an oppressive force seemed to fill the room. It began with a vague feeling of unease. John would wake up in the middle of the night, his eyes wide open but his body unresponsive. He could see the familiar outlines of his furniture, the soft glow of his alarm clock, the shadows cast by the moonlight. But something was different. The air felt thicker, heavier, and there was an undeniable sense that he was not alone. The first night it happened, John dismissed it as a bad dream. But when the episodes repeated, night after night, he knew something was wrong. His paralysis came with a growing sense of dread, an overwhelming feeling of being watched. He would lie there, heart pounding, as he strained to move even a finger, but his body remained locked in place. One night, as he lay there paralyzed, he saw it for the first time. A dark silhouette standing in the corner of his room, just beyond the reach of the moonlight. The figure was tall and unnaturally thin, with long, sinewy limbs and eyes that seemed to burn with a dim, malevolent glow. It stood motionless, watching him, as if waiting for something. Each night, the figure grew bolder. It started to move, inching closer to John's bed with each episode. The closer it got, the more palpable the terror became. John could feel its presence, a chilling wave of malevolence that sent shivers down his spine. He tried to convince himself it was just a hallucination, a trick of his mind, but the fear felt too real. During the day, John's life began to unravel. Exhausted and on edge, he found it hard to concentrate at work. He became irritable, snapping at colleagues and friends. The fear followed him, a dark cloud that lingered even in the daylight. He tried to stay awake at night, but exhaustion always claimed him, pulling him back into the nightmare. One morning, after a particularly harrowing night, John discovered something that made his blood run cold. As he looked in the mirror, he saw faint, dark marks on his neck and wrists. They were thin, almost like bruises, but with no explanation of how they got there. He traced them with his fingers, the skin tender and sore. Desperate for answers, John searched online for any explanation. He found forums where people shared similar experiences, tales of dark figures and sleep paralysis. Some claimed it was a supernatural entity, others believed it was the manifestation of deep psychological trauma. None of the explanations brought him any comfort. Determined to confront his tormentor, John set up a camera in his bedroom. He needed to know if what he was experiencing was real or just a figment of his imagination. That night, as he felt the familiar weight settle over him, he focused on the camera, willing it to capture whatever happened. The next morning, John reviewed the footage with trembling hands. At first, it showed nothing unusual. He saw himself lying in bed, the rise and fall of his chest. But then, the dark figure appeared. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, gliding towards him. As it reached the bed, it leaned over him, its eyes burning with that eerie glow. John's breath caught in his throat as he watched the figure's long fingers hover over his body, pressing down on his neck and wrists. The bruises. It was real. The figure was real. He paused the video, staring at the screen in disbelief. The malevolent presence was not a mere hallucination. John knew he had to take action. He sought help from a sleep specialist who prescribed medication to help with his sleep paralysis. But deep down, he knew it wasn't enough. He needed to confront the darkness head-on. He armed himself with knowledge, learning about lucid dreaming and ways to control his sleep. That night, as the paralysis set in, John was ready. The figure appeared as expected, moving closer with its menacing presence. But this time, John fought back. He focused all his willpower on moving, on breaking free from the chains that bound him. With a monumental effort, he managed to lift his arm, swinging it at the dark figure. To his surprise, the figure recoiled, its form shimmering as if struck by an unseen force. John pressed on, fighting against the paralysis with every ounce of strength. The figure began to fade, its glowing eyes dimming as it retreated into the shadows. The encounters grew less frequent, the figure's presence weakening with each confrontation. John's bruises healed, and the terror that once gripped him began to release its hold. He continued his therapy and practiced techniques to maintain control over his sleep. The dark figure, once a nightly terror, became a distant memory. But sometimes, in the stillness of the night, John could still feel a lingering presence, a reminder of the darkness he had faced. He took a deep breath, knowing that he had the strength to confront whatever shadows lingered in the corners of his mind. And he slept, finally at peace.